Everyone in town whispered the same thing. He was ruthless, unfeeling, a man who crushed anything that dared to get close. His name carried a weight that made people hesitate before speaking. And yet, somehow, she found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain, a magnetic pull that defied every warning she had ever heard. She didn't know what it was about him. Maybe it was the way he moved with quiet authority, or the cold, piercing eyes that seemed to see through every lie, every secret, but she knew one thing for certain: he terrified her and excited her at the same time. It had started months ago, long before that night that would change everything. She was new in town, navigating a world full of polished smiles and careful conversations, and he had simply appeared, like a shadow in a sunlit room, impossible to ignore. He never smiled, never offered pleasantries, never allowed anyone close. But he watched, always watched. And somehow, she had felt it, a weight, an intensity, like the world itself slowed when he was near. People warned her. Friends, colleagues, even strangers in casual conversations, don't go near him. He's cold. He doesn't care about anyone. But warnings have a way of fading when curiosity is stronger than fear. She couldn't stop herself. Something about him was consuming her thoughts, a constant hum at the edge of her mind that refused to be silenced. And so she watched him too, from a distance, memorizing the slight tilt of his head, the way he carried himself like a king in a world that wasn't meant for ordinary people. Then came that night. She wasn't sure why she had gone to the gala. Maybe it was the allure of sophistication, maybe it was the promise of seeing him, but there he was, standing in the corner of the room, impeccably dressed, radiating a calm that demanded attention without trying. The room buzzed with chatter, laughter, clinking glasses, but all of it faded when she saw him. She felt an unusual warmth in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation that left her dizzy. He noticed her almost immediately, as if drawn to her in the same magnetic way she had been drawn to him for months. He didn't approach with small talk or charm. No, his presence was enough to silence the space between them, a tension that made her heart pound louder than the music surrounding them. When he finally moved closer, there was a precision in his step, a silent command that made her knees weak. He didn't speak at first, he never did, just studied her, and in that gaze, she saw everything: judgment, curiosity, dominance, and a hint of something else she couldn't name. Hours passed in a blur of stolen glances and unspoken tension. The gala faded into insignificance as the magnetic pull between them grew undeniable. And then, in the quiet of a balcony overlooking the city lights, he finally broke the silence. His voice was low, almost hypnotic, a sharp contrast to the cold reputation everyone claimed he held. "Why are you here?" he asked. Not accusing, not polite, just a question that carried weight. She felt her breath catch, and for the first time in months, she struggled to find words. I don't know," she admitted, feeling exposed under his gaze. "Maybe I was hoping to see you." He didn't smile, didn't soften, but the intensity of his eyes made her tremble. He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the unspoken power that had intimidated so many before her. And in that moment, something shifted. The rumors, the warnings, they all seemed irrelevant. She didn't care that everyone said he was unfeeling. She didn't care about the danger. All that mattered was the undeniable connection that had been simmering between them for months, finally igniting into something she couldn't resist. By the time the night ended, she was left breathless, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. He walked away without a word, leaving her to wonder if it had all been a fleeting moment, a cruel trick of fate. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. He had entered her life with the force of a storm, and she was powerless to stop the pull he had over her heart, her mind, and every rational thought she had ever known. That night was only the beginning, and she had no idea just how far it would go. The days after that night felt unreal, as if she were moving through a world softened at the edges, where every ordinary sound and sight seemed to carry echoes of him. She replayed the memory endlessly, the sharp tilt of his jaw, the cold precision in his gaze, the quiet dominance that left her heart pounding in ways she had never experienced before. Everyone warned her, yet every warning seemed distant, almost irrelevant, when the memory of him burned so brightly in her mind. Friends would ask if she wanted to go out, to distract herself, but she couldn't. Nothing mattered but him, the pull he exerted over her, the dangerous thrill of proximity even when he wasn't there. Her life had once been structured, careful, full of routines designed to protect her heart. Now, it felt like a fragile thing, teetering on the edge of chaos, because he had introduced a kind of danger she couldn't escape. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had always prided herself on logic, on measured choices, but here was a man who defied reason entirely, whose mere presence disrupted the rules she had lived by. And yet, in her heart, a small, defiant part of her welcomed it. She wanted the storm, the intensity, the unrelenting fire she knew he carried within him. Then he appeared again, not by accident, not by design, but as if he had orchestrated the encounter down to the smallest detail. She found herself at an art exhibit, standing in a quiet room with paintings that barely held her attention. Her eyes were scanning the crowd, looking, perhaps, for him, when she felt it, that same magnetic pull, drawing her gaze toward him even before she realized he had entered the room. He moved with that same quiet authority, commanding attention without a single word, and yet she felt as though she were the only one he noticed. The room melted away. She didn't hear the soft chatter or the faint clink of glasses. She only saw him, standing across the space like a figure out of a dream, sharp, untouchable, completely untamed. This time, she didn't try to hide. She walked toward him, heart hammering, palms slightly damp, the tension between them palpable in a way that made every breath she took feel shallow. He didn't flinch, didn't even turn toward her at first. He simply watched, silent and calculating, as if measuring her, testing the boundaries she hadn't even known existed. And then, the corner of his mouth quirked, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, a motion that made her pulse spike with a mixture of fear and longing. She had never been so captivated, so completely aware of a single person in her life, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. "Why are you following me?" he asked finally, his voice low and edged with that dangerous calm that had drawn her in from the start. There was no accusation in it, no real challenge, only the subtle dominance that made her feel exposed yet electrified all at once. She blinked, caught off guard, and then found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "I'm not following you. I just..." Words failed her, clumsy and inadequate for the storm of feelings inside her. He tilted his head, watching her struggle, and the effect was devastating. The quiet power he wielded was overwhelming, yet utterly magnetic, like a force she had no choice but to surrender to. For hours, they moved through the exhibit, the space between them charged with a tension that left her lightheaded. He spoke little, yet every word, every glance, seemed to carve into her mind, leaving marks she would carry long after he had gone. She felt the dichotomy of him, the ruthless reputation, the cold exterior, the whispers of danger, and yet beneath it, she sensed a depth, a complexity, that no one else ever seemed to see. She was drawn not just to the man everyone feared, but to the unseen layers beneath, curious, desperate even, to unravel the enigma that he presented so deliberately. By the end of the evening, they were standing on the rooftop of the building, the city lights sprawling beneath them in a vast, glittering expanse. The night air was crisp, sharp against her skin, yet she felt warmth in a place she didn't expect, the space between them, charged with an intensity that words could never capture. He leaned close, the scent of him overwhelming, his presence so dominant that she felt as if the world had narrowed to just this moment, just this breath, just him. And when his hand brushed against hers, subtle yet deliberate, she felt a shiver that ran straight through her, igniting something she couldn't contain. She wanted to speak, to ask him questions, to demand explanations for the pull he had over her, but the words died in her throat. He didn't need explanations. He simply existed, a force of nature that made her heart race, her thoughts scatter, her very body respond in ways that scared her. She realized then that she had crossed an invisible threshold, one that separated curiosity from obsession. She was caught, hopelessly, undeniably, in the orbit of a man who could have crushed her without a second thought, and yet, for some reason, she wanted him to. She wanted the danger. She wanted the storm. She wanted him. Hours passed unnoticed as the city hummed around them, the quiet punctuated only by their shared breathing and the faint whispers of distant traffic. And then, with a calm that belied the storm he carried inside, he stepped back, his eyes locking with hers one last time for the night. It was a look that said everything and nothing at once: caution, warning, desire, control. She felt the weight of it, heavy and intoxicating, and knew that she was already lost. She was addicted to the tension, to the intensity, to the unfeeling man everyone said was incapable of care, and she couldn't bring herself to resist. As she walked home that night, her mind raced with thoughts she could barely organize, heart pounding in ways that defied logic. She replayed every glance, every brush of his hand, every quiet word that had landed with devastating precision. The rumors, the fear, the warnings, they all seemed meaningless now. What mattered was him, and the undeniable truth that she was no longer simply observing from a distance. She was part of this dangerous dance, caught in a web of intensity that promised exhilaration and heartbreak in equal measure. And somewhere deep inside, she realized with a thrill she couldn't suppress, she didn't want it any other way. The days that followed were a strange mix of normal life and relentless obsession. She tried to focus on her work, on her friends, on the routines she had once found comforting, but every glance at her phone, every unexpected sound, seemed to make her heart leap with anticipation. She wondered if he would reach out, if he would break the silence that hung between them like a fragile glass ready to shatter. And yet, even in the absence of contact, he was there, in her thoughts, in the restless stirring of her chest, in the quiet moments where the world seemed to pause and leave her alone with her own longing. No one understood it. Friends tried to pull her back into reality, warning her that she was chasing something dangerous, something she might never truly understand. They didn't know him. They didn't know the weight of his presence, the way his eyes could cut through pretense and lie, leaving nothing but raw truth in their wake. And truthfully, she wasn't even sure she wanted to understand him fully. There was a thrill in the unknown, a power in the mystery that made her feel alive in ways she hadn't in years. She had always been cautious, careful, meticulous, but he had upended every rule she had lived by. And she was helpless against it. Then, without warning, he appeared again. Not in a social setting, not at some public event, but where she least expected it, her favorite cafe, a small, quiet place where she went to escape the world. She was sitting at a corner table, her laptop open, attempting to focus on an article, when she felt it. The shift in energy, the magnetic pull that made her stomach clench. She looked up, and there he was, standing by the counter, eyes scanning the room until they found hers. Her breath caught, and her fingers froze mid-typing. People walked around him, oblivious, but she couldn't move. He was here, in her space, and it felt like the universe had tilted on its axis just to bring them together. He didn't rush over. He didn't make small talk or apologize for appearing out of nowhere. He simply walked, deliberately, each step measured, controlled, until he was standing before her table. The intensity in his gaze made her feel both exposed and exhilarated, as if he could see every fear, every desire, every secret she had tried so hard to hide. And yet, there was no malice there, only a cold curiosity, sharp and consuming, that made her pulse race. "You're always here," he said finally, his voice low, smooth, and unnervingly confident. She blinked, unsure whether to feel defensive, embarrassed, or thrilled. I like this place," she managed to say, though her voice sounded small even to her own ears. He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if deciding whether she was worth the effort of conversation. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged, heavy with anticipation, a tension that made her ache in ways she had never known. And then, in a move so subtle it almost went unnoticed, he slid into the chair across from her. Not beside her, not at a distance, but directly facing her, closing the gap without a word. She felt a shiver run down her spine. This was the kind of closeness that everyone warned against, the kind that left her vulnerable, raw, exposed. And yet, she didn't pull away. She couldn't. For hours, they sat like that, talking in fragments, in glances, in moments that carried more weight than words could ever capture. He was careful not to speak too much, not to reveal too much, and yet every word, every glance, every small gesture seemed meticulously designed to draw her deeper into his orbit. She found herself hanging on each movement, each subtle shift of expression, addicted to the magnetic pull that refused to release her. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that she no longer wanted freedom from it. She wanted the tension, the intensity, the dangerous game they were both playing without acknowledging it outright. As the afternoon light faded into evening, he leaned closer across the table, and for a moment, she felt as if the air itself had thickened around them. She could feel the heat emanating from him, the controlled strength in his presence, the unspoken power that made every nerve in her body alert. And then he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "You know why people say I'm ruthless," he said. There was no accusation, no pride, just an acknowledgement of the truth everyone whispered about him behind closed doors. But they don't know the rest of the story. She looked at him, heart pounding, desperate to understand, desperate for some glimpse into the man who had captured her thoughts and stolen her nights. "What rest of the story?" she asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, she saw a shadow, a depth of emotion that contradicted every rumor she had ever heard. "The part they can't see," he murmured. "The part that isn't for them. The part I've never let anyone touch." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them, heavy and potent. She swallowed hard, feeling a pull she couldn't resist. She wanted to know that part, to be the one he let in, to cross the invisible line that no one else had dared approach. The cafe emptied gradually, the hum of life around them fading into a quiet stillness that felt like it existed solely for the two of them. He leaned even closer, close enough that she could feel his breath, his warmth, the magnetic force of his presence pressing against her senses. And she realized something profound. She was no longer merely curious, no longer merely drawn to him. She was entangled, irrevocably caught in a web of desire, danger, and fascination that had no easy escape. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every fiber of her being urged her to stay, to sink deeper into the intensity that only he could create. When he finally stood to leave, the silence between them was electric. There were no promises, no declarations, only a lingering, charged energy that spoke volumes. She watched him go, each step measured, deliberate, leaving her with the realization that she had crossed a threshold she could never uncross. She was addicted, not to a person, exactly, but to the force, the storm, the unyielding intensity he carried so effortlessly. And somewhere deep within her, she welcomed it, knowing that the nights ahead would be filled with a tension, a pull, a dangerous attraction she could neither control nor resist. Walking home, the city lights blurred around her, each one reflecting a fragment of the storm he had unleashed within her. She had tried to maintain control, tried to rationalize her feelings, tried to protect herself from the chaos that followed him like a shadow. But that afternoon had made it clear, she wasn't in control anymore. He was. And she didn't want it any other way. Every warning, every whispered rumor, every cautious piece of advice from friends, they were meaningless now. She was in too deep, and the dangerous, unfeeling man everyone feared had become the center of her world, whether she wanted to admit it or not. The following week felt surreal, as though the world had shifted slightly off its usual axis. Every ordinary moment, the hum of traffic, the chatter in cafes, the casual laughter of strangers, seemed to carry echoes of him, as if his presence lingered in the air long after he had gone. She tried to distract herself with work, with errands, with anything that could keep her mind occupied, but the pull he had over her was relentless. It wasn't just attraction, it was a magnetic force that drew her toward him in ways she didn't understand and didn't want to understand. She had warned herself once, twice, 100 times to maintain distance, to protect her heart, yet every thought seemed to circle back to him. She hadn't heard from him directly since the cafe, and part of her feared that the intensity of their encounters had been fleeting, a cruel trick of fate designed to ensnare her emotions. But deep down, she knew that the connection between them was far from ordinary. It was more than curiosity, more than attraction, it was an invisible thread that tugged relentlessly at her, tying her thoughts, her heart, and even her rational mind to him. She tried to pretend she was busy, tried to drown the ache of longing in work and social obligations, but each day felt heavier, more hollow, as if her life was on pause until she saw him again. Then, as if the universe had finally conspired in her favor, he appeared. Not in a grand, orchestrated moment, but in a quiet, unexpected place, the bookstore she visited almost every weekend, a haven of calm and familiar smells that usually brought her comfort. She was browsing the shelves when she sensed the shift in energy, that same magnetic pull that had drawn her attention countless times before. She turned, almost instinctively, and there he was, standing in the aisle, tall, commanding, perfectly composed. For a moment, the world around them disappeared, the hum of the store fading into insignificance, leaving only the two of them suspended in a quiet tension that seemed impossible to break. He didn't smile, didn't approach with casual conversation. He simply observed, his eyes locking on hers with that same intensity that had haunted her dreams. She felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of fear, desire, and exhilaration that made her stomach twist. He moved closer, deliberate and measured, until he was standing near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You're here again," he said softly, almost like an observation rather than a question. Her heart raced at the sound of his voice, low and controlled, commanding attention without trying. I like to read," she said, her words sounding timid even to herself. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet there was a thrill in it, a dangerous excitement that made her pulse quicken. He tilted his head, studying her, and the effect was devastating. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken words and latent energy, and she realized that she was powerless to resist him. Every rational thought, every cautionary warning, had been swept aside by the force of his presence. She wanted this, wanted the danger, the intensity, the unknown depths he promised. For hours, they wandered the store, not speaking much, but existing in a shared space that seemed intimate despite the bustling surroundings. Every glance, every subtle gesture, carried weight, a silent conversation that neither needed to put into words. She felt her mind and heart racing, caught in a web of tension that was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. The stories on the shelves, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, even the soft shuffle of other customers became insignificant compared to the electric connection that crackled between them. She realized she was addicted, not just to him, but to the storm he carried, to the magnetic pull that left her breathless and craving more. Eventually, they found themselves in a secluded corner of the store, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows that danced across his sharp features. He leaned slightly closer, close enough that she could feel his presence like a tangible force pressing against her senses. The smell of him, a mixture of something crisp and grounding, made her heart beat faster, her thoughts scatter. She tried to speak, to say something meaningful, but the words dissolved in the heat of the moment. And then he spoke, his voice low, deliberate, and hauntingly intimate. "You're thinking too much," he said. "Stop analyzing me. Just feel." Her breath caught. That simple instruction, that effortless command, sent a thrill through her body. She realized he didn't need to speak volumes. Every glance, every movement, every subtle touch was enough to unravel her completely. She wanted to obey, wanted to surrender, wanted to feel the intensity of him without the interference of her own caution or hesitation. And in that quiet corner, surrounded by the scent of old books and the dim warmth of the lamp, she felt a surrender unlike anything she had ever known. Time seemed to distort around them, hours stretching into minutes, minutes into seconds, until the world beyond that corner ceased to exist. Every instinct screamed caution, but every heartbeat, every shiver, every nerve ending urged her to stay, to immerse herself in the raw, unrelenting tension he radiated. She had crossed boundaries she didn't even know existed, and yet she didn't regret a single step. The warnings, the rumors, the fear, they were meaningless compared to the intensity of the connection that bound them together. Finally, he straightened, giving her a lingering look that was both commanding and elusive, and without a word, he moved toward the exit. She watched, breathless, as he disappeared into the night, leaving her with the heavy, exhilarating weight of his absence. She felt both exhilarated and aching, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions she couldn't control. She knew this was only the beginning. He was a storm she couldn't tame, a force she couldn't resist, and she was entirely, irrevocably caught in his orbit. As she left the bookstore, the city lights blurred around her, mirroring the whirlwind inside. Her heart was pounding, her thoughts consumed, and yet she smiled, knowing that the danger, the intensity, and the magnetic pull of the man everyone warned her about had become the center of her world. She didn't know what the next encounter would bring, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was no longer a bystander. She was part of something intense, something consuming, and something that could change her life forever. And she didn't want it any other way. The days that followed were a whirlwind of anticipation and quiet obsession. She moved through her routine with a sort of mechanical precision, her mind always half occupied by the thought of him, by the intensity that seemed to linger in every corner of her life. Every message notification made her jump, every shadow or sudden movement made her pulse spike. She tried to convince herself that she was being irrational, that perhaps her imagination was amplifying his presence, but deep down, she knew the truth: he had become a force in her life that could not be ignored, a gravity that pulled her toward him whether she wanted it or not. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way he made her feel alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. Ordinary days seemed dull and lifeless in comparison to the electrifying moments when he was near, when every glance, every subtle touch, every unspoken word carried more weight than she had ever imagined. She had warned herself to stay cautious, to protect herself, to remember that he was ruthless, unfeeling, a man everyone feared. But caution was a word that had lost all meaning. Every instinct screamed that he was dangerous, that he could break her in an instant, yet every fiber of her being longed to be near him, to feel the storm he carried so effortlessly. And then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, they found themselves together again. It was a private event, a small gathering of influential people where appearances were everything and emotions were carefully controlled. She spotted him immediately, standing across the room like a sentinel, radiating calm authority while the crowd buzzed around him in oblivion. Her heart pounded, and she felt a familiar shiver of anticipation and fear as she moved toward him, each step purposeful yet hesitant, as if testing the boundaries she had already crossed so many times before. He noticed her the moment she entered the room, his gaze locking on hers with that same intensity that had haunted her thoughts for weeks. The rumors, the warnings, the careful distance she had tried to maintain, all of it evaporated in an instant under the force of his stare. He approached with that measured, deliberate stride that made her pulse race, stopping just close enough that the tension between them became almost unbearable. She could feel his presence like a physical weight pressing against her, drawing her in, making it impossible to look away or think clearly. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low, controlled, and intoxicating in its simplicity. There was no anger, no accusation, only the subtle command that made her heart skip a beat. She tried to respond casually, tried to maintain a semblance of composure, but every word felt inadequate in the presence of the storm he carried. "I wasn't avoiding you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, though even she could feel the tremor in it. He tilted his head, studying her, and she realized that he could see right through every attempt at pretense, every carefully crafted defense she had tried to maintain. The conversation that followed was a dance of words and silences, a carefully measured exchange that revealed nothing and everything at once. He spoke little, each word deliberate and heavy with unspoken meaning, while she found herself both terrified and exhilarated by the intensity of his attention. It was as if every glance, every subtle movement, was designed to draw her deeper into his orbit, to make her crave the connection she could neither understand nor resist. She felt her heart racing, her mind spinning, and yet she couldn't bring herself to step back. The danger, the unpredictability, the raw intensity, it was addictive, a pull she had no desire to escape. Hours passed in a blur, the world around them fading into insignificance. The murmurs of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the soft music, all of it became background noise to the storm of emotions that swirled between them. She realized with a mixture of awe and fear that she was completely captivated, utterly ensnared by a man who everyone said was incapable of care, incapable of feeling. And yet here he was, holding her attention, bending her thoughts and emotions with a precision that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Eventually, they found themselves on the balcony, the city lights sparkling beneath them like a mirror of the fire she felt inside. The cool night air contrasted with the heat radiating from him, the tension between them palpable in a way that made her breath catch. He didn't speak at first, simply stood there, observing her, and she realized that in his silence there was as much communication as in any words. Every shiver, every glance, every subtle inhale of breath conveyed a message she didn't fully understand but instinctively responded to. "You're thinking too much again," he said finally, his voice low and smooth, yet commanding. She felt her pulse spike at the sound, the subtle power behind the words leaving her both anxious and exhilarated. She wanted to respond, to argue, to explain, but found that words failed her in his presence. Instead, she simply nodded, surrendering to the magnetic pull, to the intensity that had become her constant companion. And in that surrender, she felt alive in a way that scared her, thrilled her, and left her craving more. He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the faint scent that had haunted her dreams, the undeniable force of his presence. She realized that she was no longer merely fascinated, she was ensnared, addicted to the tension, the danger, the exhilaration of being near him. Every nerve ending seemed alive, every heartbeat a drum of anticipation, every thought consumed by him. The world outside their shared bubble ceased to exist, leaving only the electric connection that bound them together. When he finally stepped back, leaving her breathless and dizzy, she felt a mixture of awe, longing, and fear. He hadn't promised anything, hadn't given her any assurance, yet the weight of his presence lingered like a shadow, impossible to ignore. She realized that she was no longer a bystander in her own life, she had become part of a force she could neither understand nor control. And the truth, exhilarating and terrifying as it was, settled deep in her chest. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the intensity, wanted the danger, wanted every moment that left her heart racing and her mind reeling. As she walked home, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, she felt the undeniable truth of what had begun between them. He was not like anyone else she had ever known, and she had crossed a threshold she could never return from. Every warning, every rumor, every word of caution from friends seemed meaningless in the face of the storm he represented. She was caught, completely and irrevocably, in his orbit, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The intensity of their encounters only grew with time, each moment spent together leaving her both exhilarated and trembling with anticipation. She couldn't escape him even if she tried, the memory of his presence lingered in her mind like a persistent flame, flickering and consuming all rational thought. Each text she imagined receiving, each unexpected shadow in a crowded room, seemed to bring him closer, yet she never knew what would happen next. It was a dangerous balance, one she couldn't resist and didn't want to, no matter how many times she reminded herself of the warnings: ruthless, unfeeling, untouchable. One evening, she found herself at a charity gala, a sprawling event filled with the wealthy and influential, yet even in a sea of people, she felt like she was alone with him. He arrived as always, quiet, composed, commanding attention without effort. She noticed him immediately, the subtle shift in the room signaling his presence, and her stomach tightened with a combination of fear and desire. This wasn't the cautious attraction of fleeting curiosity. It was something deeper, more consuming. Her heart raced as she navigated through the crowd, eyes locked on him, each step purposeful yet tentative, as if approaching a storm she couldn't control. He didn't move to greet her immediately. Instead, he observed, his gaze sharp and calculating, the kind of attention that made her feel simultaneously exposed and electrified. When he finally stepped closer, the air between them became heavy with anticipation. "You're hard to track," he said, low and deliberate, a hint of amusement lacing the edge of his controlled tone. She tried to speak, tried to offer a reply, but words seemed to fail her. He had this uncanny ability to strip her of composure with a single look, and yet she welcomed it, craving the tension he so effortlessly created. The gala faded into the background as they moved together through quiet corridors and secluded spaces, the thrumming energy between them impossible to ignore. Each moment was charged, each glance loaded with unspoken promises and dangerous curiosity. She could feel the magnetic pull stronger than ever, a force that left her trembling yet exhilarated. She wasn't merely infatuated, she was ensnared, caught in a web of emotions that had no predictable outcome and no safe retreat. And she didn't want one. Hours passed as they navigated the gala's private spaces, their interactions measured yet intimate. His presence was overwhelming, his controlled intensity a constant reminder of the danger and allure that defined him. Every brush of his hand, every subtle motion, seemed to leave her breathless, and she realized that this was no longer a game. The emotional stakes were higher than she had ever encountered, the attraction deeper, more consuming. He wasn't just a man, he was a force, a storm, and she had willingly stepped into its path. Eventually, they found themselves on the rooftop terrace, the city skyline sprawling beneath them in a glittering expanse. The cool night air contrasted with the warmth emanating from him, heightening the tension in a way that left her senses alive and every nerve-ending alert. He leaned slightly closer, close enough that she could feel the energy radiating from him, the subtle dominance that had captivated her from the very beginning. And in that proximity, in the quiet of the night, she understood something she hadn't before: she was not merely drawn to him. She was caught, completely and irrevocably, in the gravity of his presence. "You're impossible," he murmured, his voice low, edged with something she couldn't quite name, a mix of fascination, challenge, and quiet intensity. She felt a shiver run through her at the sound, each word embedding itself in her mind, leaving a lingering echo that refused to fade. She wanted to argue, to defy him, to maintain control, but the truth was undeniable: she had none. He had claimed her attention, her thoughts, her emotions, in ways she didn't understand and couldn't resist. Every instinct told her to step back, yet every fiber of her being urged her forward, deeper into the storm he represented. The night stretched on, a seamless blur of conversation, stolen glances, and moments of quiet intensity. She realized that she had never felt anything like this before, never experienced a pull so powerful, so consuming, so terrifyingly irresistible. Each encounter left her heart racing, her thoughts spinning, yet she craved more, knowing that whatever awaited her in his presence was worth every heartbeat, every shiver, every pang of fear. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and yet he had become the center of her universe, the one constant she couldn't, and didn't want to, escape. As the gala wound down and the crowds dispersed, they remained on the terrace, two figures suspended against the backdrop of the city, caught in a tension that neither could, and neither wanted to, release. The air between them was electric, heavy with unspoken words and emotions too powerful to articulate. She felt an exhilaration unlike anything she had ever known, an intoxicating blend of fear and desire that left her breathless and longing for more. Finally, he spoke again, his voice a quiet command that resonated in her chest. "You belong here," he said, not as a possessive declaration, but as a statement of undeniable truth. She felt the weight of those words, the power behind them, and knew that he was right. She was caught, fully, irrevocably, and she would not, could not, deny it. The storm he represented had become hers as much as it was his, and she welcomed it, craving the danger and intensity that only he could provide. When he finally turned to leave, she watched him disappear into the night, leaving her alone with the echo of his presence. And yet, she didn't feel fear or regret. She felt exhilaration, anticipation, and a deep, unshakable understanding. Her life had been changed, irrevocably, by a man everyone warned her about, a man who was ruthless and unfeeling to the world, yet had made her feel alive in ways she had never imagined. She was caught, yes, but she had chosen to be, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Walking home through the quiet city streets, her mind replayed every moment, every glance, every word, every subtle touch. She realized that she had stepped beyond caution, beyond fear, and into something dangerous, thrilling, and completely consuming. He was no longer just a man of rumors and warnings, he was the force that shaped her days, the storm that haunted her nights, and the undeniable presence she could neither resist nor escape. And for the first time, she accepted it fully. She wanted him, every part of him, every storm he carried, and she would follow the pull wherever it led, no matter the risk. The following week, anticipation hung over her like a storm cloud, electric and unavoidable. She couldn't stop thinking about him, couldn't stop replaying their encounters in her mind, the stolen moments, the magnetic pull, the way he had made her feel alive in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Every shadow, every sudden movement, every unexpected message, or lack of one, set her heart racing. She realized, with a mix of fear and exhilaration, that she had fully surrendered to the force he represented. She was caught, completely, irrevocably, and yet she didn't feel trapped. She felt alive. It was during a late evening at a quiet lounge, away from the eyes of the world, that they finally met again. The city lights shimmered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, the room seemed to shrink, leaving only them, suspended in a world that existed solely for the two of them. He was there, as always, commanding attention without trying, radiating the same calm, controlled intensity that had ensnared her thoughts for months. The rumors, the warnings, the cautious advice from everyone she had ever trusted, they all faded into irrelevance. There was only him, only the pull he exerted over her, and the undeniable truth she could no longer deny: she was his, willingly and completely. He didn't approach with casual words or playful charm. No, his presence was enough to silence everything else, to draw her attention like a lodestone. She felt her heart pound in her chest, a rhythm that seemed to echo the storm of emotions between them. And then he spoke, low and deliberate, his voice carrying a weight that made her knees weaken slightly. "You've been thinking too much," he said, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the noise of the world and landed deep within her. She nodded, unable to deny the truth in his words. Her thoughts had been consumed by him, by the tension between them, by the intoxicating danger he represented. He moved closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the subtle dominance that had haunted her dreams. Every instinct in her body told her to step back, to maintain caution, to protect herself, but every nerve screamed in defiance, urging her forward into the storm. She had crossed the line too many times to turn back now. The pull between them was irresistible, consuming, overwhelming. She leaned in slightly, closing the small distance, and felt an electricity pass between them that left her breathless, trembling with desire, yet strangely calm, as if she had finally found the place she was meant to be. For hours, they existed in a world suspended from reality. Words were scarce, unnecessary. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every shared breath carried more meaning than language could convey. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet entirely safe in his presence, paradoxical as it seemed. The rumors, the stories, the whispers of cruelty and unfeeling detachment, all of it dissolved when he was near. She realized, finally, that he wasn't merely ruthless, he was precise, controlled, a storm contained within a human form, and she had been drawn to that storm from the very beginning. The night deepened, and they found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like distant stars. The air was cool, crisp, yet every glance, every subtle motion between them carried heat, a tension that left her breathless and acutely aware of every nerve in her body. He leaned closer, close enough that the warmth of him pressed against her senses, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. She felt her pulse quicken, her chest tighten, her mind teetering between reason and desire. And in that charged silence, she understood something essential: she had chosen this, embraced it, and wanted it with a certainty she had never felt before. "You're mine," he said finally, low, deliberate, and undeniably commanding, though not in a possessive or harsh way. She felt the weight of those words, heavy with meaning, and yet filled with a strange tenderness she hadn't expected. It wasn't about control. It was about the undeniable connection they shared, the bond that had been building from the first stolen glance to this very night. She shivered, not from fear, but from the intensity of knowing that she had been seen, understood, and desired in ways no one else could reach. She looked into his eyes and saw everything she had sensed all along: the depth beneath the cold exterior, the carefully contained emotions, the storm of desire and intensity that made him who he was. She realized that she had fallen completely, irrevocably, not just for the danger or the thrill, but for the man himself, complex and untouchable, yet willing to let her in, even in small, careful ways. Her heart swelled with a mix of awe, fear, and longing, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Hours passed unnoticed as they stood together, the world outside fading into irrelevance. Every instinct she had warned her against him, yet every emotion screamed surrender. She understood finally that she didn't want escape. She didn't want safety. She wanted him, in every way that mattered, with all the intensity, danger, and passion that had defined their encounters. The rumors, the fears, the cautionary advice, they were meaningless. She had chosen the storm, and the storm had chosen her. When the night ended and he finally stepped back, leaving her with a lingering glance that promised both danger and desire, she felt an overwhelming mixture of longing and exhilaration. She knew that their story was far from over. The tension, the magnetic pull, the intoxicating mixture of fear and attraction, these were only the beginning of something that would continue to shape their lives. She was caught in his orbit, completely and willingly, and she knew that she wouldn't have it any other way. As she walked home, the city lights reflected in her eyes, mirroring the storm that raged inside her. She realized that she had crossed every threshold, abandoned every pretense, and embraced the truth. He was ruthless, unfeeling, and dangerous, but she couldn't resist him. She didn't want to. The pull between them was irresistible, the connection undeniable, and the intensity of their bond was something she had chosen to follow, wherever it might lead. For the first time, she felt both fear and exhilaration in perfect balance. She was alive in a way she had never been before, consumed by desire, danger, and longing, yet comforted by the undeniable presence of the man everyone warned her about. He had entered her life like a storm, unrelenting, unstoppable, and she had surrendered, not out of weakness but out of choice. And as the night settled over the city, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future held, she would follow that storm, willingly, passionately, irrevocably.